Yeah, so I'm Ryan Wilson. I was trying to do a fancy tech thing here with my slides. It didn't work out, so I'm going to do fallback here. I wanted to demo the cool technology I'm about to talk to you about, but it didn't work quite right. So I'm work for Spotlight Cybersecurity, part-time here in local Augusta security firm. And I've been playing with these OpenWRT-based routers for a long time, and I wanted to share with you some cool things you can do with them to help as a sort of a training platform and as a customized security sensor. My plan is to sort of walk you through why I care about this. Like, why is this important? Kind of give you a little history background about how we ended up with OpenWRT today. I'm going to walk you through how you would go about installing it if you wanted to try it out at home. We'll do a really quick tour around OpenWRT because it's its own Linux distribution, so it's a little different from other distributions you've played with. That's probably about the first half of the talk, and the second half of the talk I just want to kind of run through all of the different use cases that I've tried and to sort of inspire you as to how you could use this yourself. So why should you care about this? Well, my father-in-law cut out an article from the Augusta Chronicle a couple of weeks ago for me that said, experience is vital in the cyber job hunt. Augusta University apparently did a survey here in the Augusta area, and the firms that they interviewed said that experience was way more important than your college degrees and certifications, if you can read the little fine print there. Well, that's really good to know, that that's what's going to be so important. But the question is, where am I going to get that experience? If I'm a college student or even just entry-level position, how am I going to get better at this? I just attended the talk with Don Murdoch, and he said, you can't buy skill. So if we can't buy it, where are we going to get it from? So we need these, essentially, we need these enterprise skills that typically cost boku bucks, except if you're in that position, you're on this beer budget. How am I going to be able to buy that? How am I going to get to do this? So enter these Soho embedded system routers. The WRT54G, the Linksys one, was probably one of the early popular ones, released in December 2002. And what the hardware hacking community sort of discovered is, hey, this thing runs Linux under the hood. And that means it's got the source code is covered by the GPL, so they kind of pressured Linksys to release the source code, and they did. And the hardware hackers were like, okay, cool, now we can do some really neat stuff with this hardware. I don't remember exactly what date I bought my WRT54G, but I got in sometime in that year or two after that, flashed it with custom firmware, and used it for a really long time. The firmware is open source. These hardware actually has some really interesting capabilities. It's got this built-in Ethernet switch. It's based on flash memory, which is actually really handy because that means there's no moving parts in here. No fans, no hard drives, very little that can go, that can break along the way. So it's a handy little embedded system box that we can fully customize. And you can still get them really cheap. I bought a couple of these Linksys EA4500s for the talk, and you'll see them in the show up here, but they are $40 to buy a refurbished unit on Amazon right now. These have the same programmable Ethernet switch, and they've got a pretty good chipset that supports Wi-Fi well, which is important for a couple of the use cases I'll share in just a minute. My go-to OpenWRT box was this TPLink Edition because it was only $20. I mean, this was dirt cheap, and every now and then on Amazon it would drop to $10. So this was a really great thing. However, the hardware is kind of limited. The memory's pretty low on it. I wouldn't recommend it for starting today, but this was what they used to spend just $20 to kind of get one of these boxes. So contrast that with the Raspberry Pi, very capable, customizable platform, but typically you're going to be spending at least $55 to get like a whole kit, and that doesn't even include the memory card to kind of get started. This doesn't have an Ethernet switch. You just have a single Ethernet port, so you got to supplement that. And at least the Raspberry Pi units I've played with, I use Broadcom chipsets, which for some of the wireless use cases I'm going to talk about doesn't work quite as well. I just haven't had as good support with the Broadcom stuff. So after the WRT54G came out, a couple of custom firmwares popped up. DDWRT was probably one of the most popular ones. Another very similar one was Tomato. And while you could customize them pretty extensively, you were relatively limited into sort of using their web interface and some of the options that they put under the hood. OpenWRT came around a little bit later and introduced the ability of putting a whole flash file system on the flash memory so that you could completely customize it and use it more or less like you use the Linux box that, of any other distribution. So you have a full file system, you can put files on it, and it actually just saves it off into flash memory along the way. Just because it's relevant because if you go looking for documentation, you'll also see this other one, lead. Unfortunately, the OpenWRT developers had a little bit of a dispute a few years ago about some practices and the way they handled the project and accepted new code, and there was a fork. They forked off to this lead project for a little while. Fortunately, it's a happy ending. They finally resolved their differences. They've reunited under the OpenWRT name, but you will still see a number of blog posts. Even if you go to my website, you'll see even one of the pieces of code I put out still references this lead, because that was where active development happened for a while. And just as a side reference, this icon over here comes from ASUS Merlin. The ASUS routers are not typically very well supported with OpenWRT. There is another sort of custom vendor, custom firmware called ASUS Merlin that you can download if you have one of those devices instead. I got started with this, like I mentioned back in a while. I still have my WRT54GL, and my 54G that I had, I ran it literally until the capacitors burst on it. It was sitting on my desk, and I heard this little buzzing sound. I saw the light starting to flicker, and over a period of weeks it got worse, and then finally it just wouldn't turn on anymore. I mean, so these things work really well. They've been workhorses for the kinds of purposes I use them for, and this still works for me at home as a Ethernet bridge or wireless bridge when I need it periodically. So this is a really cool set of opportunities, but there are some trade-offs. And one of the things I want to warn you, if you want to start out with this, is you really have to pay attention to the manufacturing model numbers and version numbers. So unfortunately, I assume it's because on Amazon, once a model number gets popular and gets good reviews, the company doesn't want to lose that. So they'll introduce a new version, hopefully to save them money or a new price point, and they will completely change the underlying hardware, but keep the model number exactly the same. And sometimes even the outside of the case is exactly the same. And so if you look on the underside of these, this is a picture from underside mine, you'll see that there's this place where it's got the model number and there's a little version number there. You really have to pay attention to that, so that you don't go to Amazon, order the router you think is supported, and then you end up with the newest and latest and greatest one, which actually is not yet supported. OpenWRT depends on the chipsets that are underlying these devices, not the actual model number. So pay attention as you look up which one you want to try. I chose the Linksys EA4500 because they haven't updated in a while, and both of the versions that are out on the market are very well supported right now. But there's a number of others that are like that as well. Another challenge is you get no support. The companies don't expect you to do this. They want you to use the stock firmware. And while I think some of them are happy for you to play with it, you are voiding your warranty. And as the chat man page says, if it breaks, you get to keep both pieces. So. Because of that, because you can break them relatively easily, you got to be careful. It's very easy to brick these devices, either while flashing it if you make a mistake, or if you configure it incorrectly. Sometimes there's a few weird configuration settings that could make it inaccessible. I've been really careful because I didn't want to lose any of my boxes, and so I actually haven't bricked a device yet. Hope is not lost if you do that. There's a couple of fail-safe modes. There's also hardware hackers have discovered that if you open them up, you can solder serial ports onto the board and flash it that way. I don't have time for that, but if you're interested in that, all this stuff is within the realm of the possible. Newer devices like the EA4500 that I mentioned actually keep two firmwares on at all times. If one of them fails, it'll fall back to a known good one. So it's a little safer with some of these more recent devices. But the big trade-off that I want you to kind of walk away with is this is about your time. You could pay for enterprise convenience and get an enterprise equipment, but if you're choosing to kind of go this route, it's essentially because you have more time than money. And so you're going to end up spending some more time hacking with it and trying to work through some problems. That's great for skills building, but just know if you want to get to the end quickly, you'll usually run into some glitches along the way. I wish I had time to tell you about all the challenges, but just be aware, I said it's really a time-money trade-off. I said if you want to play with this, really cool things, but it's going to take you some time to set it up. Just a few other quick notes to run through. I've heard people complain about some of these devices running high temperature because they don't have fans. I've not personally had this problem, but just be on the lookout. I've had a few hardware weirdness things, like you've got enterprise features in these things, like 802.1q VLANs, but there's sometimes a little weirdness. Like I was setting up a VLAN once and it just was not working the way that the configuration said it would, and I finally just had to give up on that and say, okay, it's not going to go. They have pretty small CPUs, very limited memory, both flash and RAM, so you're not going to run Bro on one of these things in most cases, but you can use them for a number of useful collection points and then offload it to another system, which is some of the use cases I'll share with you in just a moment. All right, so I'm going to talk about, how do you get started with this? So I purchased one of these just so I could take some pictures for this talk. Arrived from Amazon, a nice box here. You can see the front here, and then the back side here is relatively standard, router back. We got 4 LAN ports, internet port. We got a USB port that we'll use for some additional storage, and then a power and a couple of buttons. Once you get it set up, I had to load up into the stock firmware, and I was pretty amused when Cisco was pointing out when I was trying to click through to get to the firmware update screen, it was making sure like legal banner, saying, yeah, yes, I confirm that I understand that my router is completely open and unprotected before I could go through. Once you get through to the stock firmware, like what comes built in from Linksys, you just got to navigate some of the menus, find the firmware update page. Now, I went off to OpenWRT. I downloaded their firmware, and you can see I have it, choose file, loaded it up, and all you have to do at this point is hit start to get it updating, and then the system will reboot and into OpenWRT. At that point, you'll start to see this screen. This is OpenWRT's Lucy web interface. It's got many of the same features that the stock firmware would have, all in here in a nice interface. It's letting me know I might need to set a password. But one of the great things about OpenWRT is you've got a very powerful command line. I love working at the command line, so you can just pop up SSH and be working on this side, or you can use the web interface for a little easier setup. So I make this sound really easy. One of the boxes I've ordered 2 at the exact same time for testing for this talk, and one of them worked great, was that easy, and the second one came, despite ordering them at the same time, came with a different version of Linksys firmware on it and required some stepping through. So you saw I put a QR code on the last page. If you want to, I've posted further instructions on our website, spotlightcybersecurity.com, and I've sprinkled a few QR codes in here because I don't have time to quite go through all the detail of these steps. But you can see the extra steps I had to take to get that other device up and working. All right, we're in. We've got OpenWRT ready to go. What's next? So just a quick tour around the operating system. One of the reasons I liked OpenWRT is for its package management capabilities. It uses a tool called opackage, so it's a little different than if you've used like RPM or apt-get, but it's very similar concepts. There's just 2 commands you need to know. Opackage update, which says go grab the latest package feeds, like the listings. It keeps that in RAM disk, so it will, every time you reboot, you lose it. So you're going to end up running that command a lot. And then opackage install, and then the name of the package you care about. If you want to install TCP Dump, you just drop TCP Dump, and it'll take care of all the dependencies. It'll figure out that you need libpcap and get it installed for you. So installing packages is real easy. And then the configuration. OpenWRT has prided itself on a sort of a centralized configuration system called UCI, and pretty much all that's in etc config. All the files in one place. It's pretty easy just to edit the text files and then reboot it. And they have a command that'll help you through it. You can hit UCI show. It'll show you all the current configuration. You can set, once you've seen what's in there, you can set individual settings. You can see what changes are in memory but haven't been saved, and then commit them to the disk. And so those are the 4, if you want to do it at the command line, those are the 4 most important commands that you need to be aware of along the way. So that's the quick tour around OpenWRT. Before I go into use cases, though, any quick questions? All right. Yeah. SpotlightCybersecurity.com. Yeah, I got a couple other links in here I'll kind of point out along the way, but I've got some instructions on there. So we're in. We know our way around OpenWRT. What can we do with this system now? So, there's a lot of different things to do, and one of the primary ones is, hey, I can use this to help secure my network. I want to defend your home or business network. You want to set up a firewall. You want to learn Wireshark, get some real data from your network to pick it up. Try out using a security sensor like Security Onion, or maybe even do some content filtering. I've got kids at home. I'm worried about what they might stumble across. What can I do to use this position to help me to get there? So we got a pretty standard network setup. Looks a little bit like this. You've got some client devices that are connected by wires or wireless to a router, which are connected to your ISP modem, like a cable modem or DSL or something going out to the internet. So one of the things, I used to work here at Augusta University for a little while. I used to challenge my students, where are the single points of failure in this network map? Show of hands. Yeah. Yeah, the ISP modem is one of them. All right. What else we got? Yeah, we got the router. So So thanks. Yeah, so we've got a couple of single points of failure in here that we need to deal with. And we can take that to our advantage. These are the choke points on the network, perfect places for us to instrument and pull off data. And so since we control this router really well, now that we've put OpenWRT on it, let's use it to get at some data. Now, when I have trouble, or when I want to, one of the first cases was to use the firewall. This is Linux. We have a full IP tables firewall. I'm not going to go into detail about IP tables now, but there's some really awesome modules out there that can do some complex things. Some of them are not built into OpenWRT, but there's a lot of packages you can install to get at it. There's a great guide in there. OpenWRT has a custom wrapper around IP tables. The documentation is there if you want to check it out. But one of the great things is you can, if you like using just straight IP tables, you can write your own. You just stick it in this particular script, shell script, but instead of using the standard chains, use those ones instead, input rule, output rule, and forwarding rule. So full power of that IP tables firewall at your disposal with this device. But remember, we said, because we're the choke point, though, if something's going wrong on our network and we want to investigate, this is also the best place for us to get a tap on it. And so TCP dump is one of my go-to tools, quick, easy command line to be able to take a look at what's there. Just 2 quick commands to install it. If you try out TCP dump on the router, just be aware there's 2 packages. There's TCP dump and TCP Dump Mini. The full TCP dump has a whole lot of extra protocol parsers, and it's kind of large. Remember, this is embedded system, doesn't have a lot of space. So there's a second package, TCP Dump Mini, that has a lot of that pared down. Still get really useful information, but it's not going to clog up as much of your limited storage space on the device. And then you can just sort of see, I fired it up to check it out, and I actually was a little surprised. I didn't realize my Chrome browser was using Google's new QUIC protocol over UDP port 443 to talk back to Google instead of using HTTPS over TCP. But you can just real quick see what kind of traffic's happening on your network with TCP dump right from this device. But sometimes we want to be able to save off some of those PCAP files, and they don't have a whole lot of space built in. I picked the EA4500 because a lot of the newer routers actually have these USB ports. So pick up an extra flash drive off of Amazon, format it as a Linux-compatible file system, pop it in the device here, and then with a little installing a couple of extra modules, you see there's a few packages you got to install to make this work, but then you can mount it just as you would any other file system. And then it's a handy way for you to be able to use TCP dump or any other utility and save off that data onto the flash drive. And then you can either pull the flash drive out and move it to your desktop, or just use secure copy SCP over SSH to be able to move them over so you can use Wireshark on your more powerful desktop system and process it after the fact. But we also, have this, again, we have this choke point. Maybe we want to do some better analysis, like run bro or snort on this data that we can't get it working on OpenWRT router. But what about if we could tap that off? Well, typically we've used network taps for this, and you can pick up an active network tap pretty easily on Amazon. The problem is they're a little pricey, $220. It's not a lot of money, but it's, on that beer budget. What if we could do something cheaper? Can we use our OpenWRT device for it? And you can. There's a lot of different ways that you can set this up. It is not going to give you a pristine copy of your data or be as easy as if you were to buy an active tap like the Dualcomm one I just showed. So there's sort of 3 methods that I've discovered for doing this. Like I said, I have the links on the blog for more instructions if you want to get step-by-step on how to do it. But the IP tables T module is the easiest one that works on all hardware. Built into the firewall, just the downside of this is that it only works for IP traffic. So you won't pick up ARP packets going across your network or any other Ethernet-only traffic. The other downside of this is that the way that the T module works is it messes with the MAC addresses. So you won't get the original MAC addresses. For most situations, that's okay, but just be aware that it's not a perfect tap. To get a perfect tap, you got to buy certain hardware. So these EA4500s that I have running over here, they only do, they don't support this, but another model that I've used, the TPLink 3600 here, that actually, the chipset that's on the Ethernet switch has essentially a port mirroring capability built in that you can trigger. And so like I said, certain chipsets have this. You got to hunt around if you really want that particular feature. But that gives you pristine packets copied through the switch. The third option is you can use this daemon logger tool from Cisco. We'll talk about more in a minute, but again, another caveat is hardware dependent. For it to work, you have to be using a destination mirrored port that's not a switched port. So again, it's not easy, but you can accomplish this with these cheap devices if you want to kind of wrestle through, again, that time-money trade-off. They're also, because we're at that choke point, these are great for sort of other network security monitoring things. So we can do full packet capture on them. We can grab session data and export it as netflow. We can grab both the firewall logs and the DNS logs and see what kind of activity is happening on our network. The daemon logger is a great tool to do this. It captures all the packets. It'll even rotate the PCAP files for you once you fill up your file system. And so I have this set up here to capture it on my LAN port, to name it, and then to rotate the file every 600 seconds, every 10 minutes or so, and it'll age off some of the older files for you if you would like it to do that. You can save it off on that USB drive, or as I do, I will have it rotating on there, and I'll just pull the USB files, the PCAP files off when I need them if I want to do some analysis at a later time. NetFlow is very similar. There's the SoftFlow D package, which has support for exporting NetFlow version 5, NetFlow version 9. So you can all you need to do essentially is easy configuration is just point it at your NetFlow collector. Well, I didn't have a NetFlow collector running at home all the time, and so I actually just set it up to point to the local host and then use the daemon logger to capture all those packets, and then a couple of utilities strung them together to replay it. Now, unfortunately, my analysis side, I didn't get that documented in time for this talk. If you're really interested in that, send me a direct message on Twitter. I'll have my note here at the end, and I can let you know as soon as I've got that written up later. You can also, since we have all of that, the box has a DNS server on it, and all of our traffic's going through it. This is a great place to capture what is everybody looking up on the network. So it's just a couple of simple commands to turn on DNS logging. You got to bounce the DNS server, and then you'll start seeing entries like this show up in all your logs. You can see I said one of my hosts on my network was querying play.google.com, and then you can see, it tells you who queried it, which forwarding server did we send it to, and what was the response that came back from the server that we relayed to the client in the end. And so you just get a lot of log data, and it sends it all into the system log that we can then pull off. Okay, quick question? So the way that it is stored, built in, I'm going to talk about in a moment how to save it, but it is stored only in memory, and it will be lost on a reboot. The same thing with the firewall logs. You just say a couple of settings you just turn on in the built-in firewall stuff, and it'll start outputting this is using the IP tables built-in logging utilities. You start to see packets or entries in the log here. So anytime something gets dropped on your firewall, you can see an entry let you know, hey, somebody's scanning me, what's going on in my network. We can save that off here real quick, real easy. Now, if you want to be able to save it off and keep it persistent, there's a couple of utilities you can use. OpenWRT supports built-in just sending all this data to a remote syslog source. So if you've got like a log infrastructure already, you can do it that way. How I do it, I have a script shared at that bit.ly link where I just have a script I run that saves the logs onto my USB disk and just keeps a rotating file, and then I pull them off manually when I want to do analysis on them. Yeah, that one is a setting that's saved then so that it's persistent, but you have to choose that. It's not by default that way. So you've got to add that into your OpenWRT setup if you'd like that. So content filtering. So what if we want to be able to say, I've got kids at home. Most important thing I want to tell you is there's no technology silver bullet for protecting your kids online. You cannot rely on technology alone, but technology is a useful part of the puzzle. If you combine it with active parenting, having some rules about how your kids use it, and having some education with them about potential bad stuff, this helps with sort of a defense in depth strategy. A couple of tools that I've found useful to use with my OpenWRT router is pointing it at OpenDNS's Family Shield service. They block malicious and phishing traffic for us, and then they also block instantly all known adult content domains. Again, it's not going to get everything, but my goal is to sort of prevent unfortunate accidents on my network. So I want to keep them away from that. Yeah. So great thing about this is it's free, and it's an easy configuration change to be able to support that up. And by the way, I just would say I use the bit.ly links. This is your way of feedback to me. I said if I want to know after the fact, I get to track who went to those QR codes. Gives me some feedback about what topics were you guys interested in after the fact. So I'd appreciate if you'd use those. Another way to do this is Google and Bing and YouTube all have various safe search modes, and you can actually, through a little DNS trick, enforce them, require it. So you can turn them on, you can opt into them, but you can disable it too. But using this DNS trick, you can force it for all the devices on your network. And so this, again, just a simple edit of the DNS configuration, and essentially what I'm doing is forcing google.com to resolve to this IP address, which is something that Google has published, saying that yes, we can, if you go to this IP address, you will only get safe search mode every time. YouTube has something similar, Bing has something similar, and it's a pretty easy setup just to kind of, again, make sure that we're preventing accidents on the network. Another great use case I've found for this is with OpenVPN, to be able to use it for a VPN. We can do all sorts of cool things like site-to-site VPNs. Like if I've got two routers at two different locations, I can have them, one will call the other one and establish a VPN, connect the networks over a secure tunnel. That's an easy setup. Another one is sort of the remote access. Maybe you're away from home and you want to dial into your house. We got, like, if I've got my smartphone out here, I download the OpenVPN app. I can call home and get connected to my network, easy peasy, and be able to access any of the resources there. There's also some really neat wireless stuff that you can do with this. So typical wireless scenario I have at my house, I mentioned, is that if I've got a couple of older computers that I can't get them to close to my where my router is, so I use a second OpenWRT and just turn it into a wireless bridge. So you can see that server right up there is connected via wire to that OpenWRT device, and then it is a wireless client instead of an access point down to my main router, and then from there it can get out to the internet, access whatever resources it needs. So I can extend my network pretty easily this way. Another scenario I use at home is my house is rather long, and so the wireless coverage doesn't work across the whole house. So I actually had an Ethernet cable I ran sort of as a trunk line, and since I have two different wireless networks, I have a guest network and a home, sort of a main network, I actually can turn on the VLAN trunking capabilities in these routers and push both of those networks across the trunk so they can both be broadcasting it. And this doesn't use any of the mesh technologies that are more commonly used for this type of setup right now. One that I was able to do here at Augusta University that I wanted to share with permission is we set up a WEP cracking lab using these devices. We configured a AP router here with WEP stuff, and then we set up a client that would just keep pinging it and generating data, and then we were able to use some wireless capture devices to be able to capture that and then do a WEP cracking attack in the classroom with some students here. And it was great because all we have to do whenever we run it is just grab those devices, put them out in the classroom, plug them in, and then the lab just works. So it's really handy. I have since, unfortunately, had to stop working here due to scheduling reasons, but I've since developed something similar for WPA2 to be able to look at how you crack it, where you can grab the handshake and be able to catch that offline. I have to skip a couple of these scenarios due to time, but there's a lot of other useful cases, like for disaster recovery. You can run Pixie boot on these to be able to push boot images out to your devices. I use one of them as a travel router when I go to a hotel, similar to what the Armadillo guys shared this morning in the other hall, so that I could VPN to home or at least have secure Wi-Fi in my room. If you're into hardware hacking, we've got GPIO ports and audio types of things that you can control if you really want to open up the box and get in it. I've not done that, but there's some really cool things that you can do. So what I want you guys to have taken away from this is that this is a really versatile platform to be able to do some neat security sensing stuff and training. If you want to play with some of these enterprise stuff at home, this is a quick and easy way to kind of get started with it on the way. And so I want to take a couple of quick questions. I think we have a minute for that. Yes? Do you mean like for using 802.11g? No, you can support, I don't know about DDWRT. I used it briefly and then switched over to OpenWRT, so I can't speak to that one. OpenWRT supports all of the recent standards, though. Sometimes it's not always the default, though, and you'll have to flip the switch to turn on the higher performance speeds. Yeah? It's just being persistent. There's just weird things. This is all unsupported. So you'll run into weird little glitches. Like for me the other day, I was trying to install OpenWRT and it kept failing, and it wasn't until I realized I needed to upgrade the stock firmware to the latest stock firmware and then install OpenWRT. And so there's weird sort of undocumented things like that. It's just like, so if you're willing to be persistent with it, I said that's the way to go. And you're just going to, but like I said, that's the time-money trade-off a little bit. I said this is sort of unsupported space. You can do some cool things, but you're a little bit on your own. Yeah, one more real quick, and then I'll stick around afterwards if you got a question. Yeah. Does it slow down the network to do the port mirroring? When you do it in hardware, in theory, it shouldn't. I didn't do any extensive performance testing, so I can't speak to that. Yeah. Yeah, I didn't have any problems, but I wasn't trying to extensively run a lot of stuff on it. Now, I have a couple more prizes to give away, and since we're going into a break, I wanted to give you guys a little bit of a challenge for this. So you can hit my blog if you want to kind of pick up a few more links about how to get started. But I have one of these OpenWRT devices up here running an access point. If you would like to try to get into it and try to pull off a little flag off of it, you got about 5 minutes to do this if you want to try to pull it off. And just come down here and tell me the code. I said there's 2 more things here, but they said this is a device that's up here running OpenWRT. It's got OpenVPN on it. There's a config there that you can download, and if you want to try connecting into it to get a little hands-on and see what this is like, please feel free to jump in and try it out. Is that anything else? All right. Thank you very much.